Thank you. Thank you, Chair. My questions will focus around the direction and control, and I'll be talking to Mr. MacDonald for most of my questions. First of all, Mr. MacDonald, I just want to start, I think some of the concerns with moving towards a more accountability-based, transparency-based, as opposed to micromanagement-based, might come from the government in concern that if, in fact, charities gift to non-qualified donees, that somehow this money might go to non-charitable purpose, or even worst case scenario, illicit purposes. But I know, because I've reviewed S-216 and I've looked at the current legislation, that won't happen. But perhaps you could share with the committee the type of challenges that a charity would face, both reputational and legal risk, if in fact the amended legislation went through and one of the non-profit organizations or non-qualified organizations did something that was outside the charitable purposes.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because, again, it goes back to this idea that having different accountability is less accountability, and that's just simply not true. What we're looking to see is to say, organizations who want to work with non-qualified donees must do so in furtherance of their charitable purpose. Both S-216, the amendments that we're providing to the BIA, create a system where that takes place. There's not less documentation, there's not less accountability. What there is appropriate one, that's accountability measures that speak to the unique partnership and relationship set up with the non-qualified donee. And CRA would play its role in ensuring that those are observed. So, I mean, charities want to do their good work in furtherance of their charitable purpose. They're not looking to step outside. And what we're suggesting is a system that preserves both the ability to have innovative programming and have trust and confidence that the accountability measures are in place.
Very much. And maybe you could talk also just a little bit about the unintended or negative consequences on marginalized and racialized and vulnerable groups if this legislation goes through without any amendments. As I've certainly seen underneath direction and control, given the troubled history between the Canadian government and Indigenous peoples, the challenge that's because basically direction and control means that Canadian charity must take over an Indigenous nonprofit. Don't you think, or disagree if you feel, but with the prescriptive nature that we're going to repeat that error over again if we don't amend this legislation?
Well, actually, not just repeat, but in fact enhance it, because the direction and control provisions remain with the Budget Implementation Act. Own activities is not being changed in the Income Tax Act. So that's preserved, and in addition, there's this whole series of prescriptive measures. We are working in a different world where it requires charities to work with partners who are non-charities. As such, we need a system that allows this to happen because, in a sense, many of those organizations are the experts on the ground, providing the services, working with their charitable partner. And so it's critically important that the ability to do so is preserved.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last minute I'll use just to, if you could explain upon directed gifting. This is the reason why this exists is to prohibit a donor from perhaps directing a gift to help them specifically. But in this circumstance, it could have real challenges where a charitable wants to focus particular funds with respect to perhaps the Ukraine or something like that they could be technically offside. Perhaps, and I know you will do it much more eloquently than I do, you could elaborate on that, Mr. MacDonald?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it is important that as charities start to do more and more of these relationships with non-qualified donees to serve vulnerable populations here or abroad, that they have the ability to have the financial strength to be able to do that. And what we want to ensure is that organizations are able to have dollars that go towards supporting that. And so you can see if a donor wanted to come and work with a charity to create a new innovative program on an Indigenous reserve, or they would want to be able to ensure that those dollars are going. And as long as they're in furtherance of the charitable purpose, we want to make sure that that can happen.
Thank you, MP Lawrence. And now we'll hear from